India has made rapid strides in the World Bank's Doing Business report of 190 countries, where it has improved from 142nd position in 2014 to the 63rd position in 2020 in terms of ease of doing business. But does the improvement in ranking change things on the ground? What happens when an event like COVID-19 upends business? Can Indian laws and policies keep pace to deal with uncertainties and evolving trends? To discuss this and more, we have with us today Rishi Agrawal, CEO of Avantis Regtech, Gayathri Vasudevan, Chairperson, LabourNet Services India, Pradeep Mehta, Secretary General, Cuts International, and Ashwin Chandrasekhar, VP Finance and EODB Game. Thank you all for joining us today. So Rishi, my first question to you would be, like I mentioned in my opening, that India has made considerable progress when it comes to the EODB rankings. Without getting into too much of details, what is your perception of the impact on the ground? Have things improved?
So Pran, thank you for having me on the show today. Really appreciate it. Yes, the rankings have improved. We were in the bottom quartile back in 2014. We are in the second quartile in 2020, which is really the last ranking that we had. In absolute terms, significant changes have happened. But is this enough for a country that is looking to get to $10 trillion as its logical destination in this decade? The answer is no. Now, since you focused on World Bank Ease of Doing Business report, I would want to peel this onion a little further. There are about 10 parameters in the report. 4 parameters among the 10, we are still putting up a dismal show. So these 4 parameters, if you look at them, one is registering a business, we are ranked at 136th. Registering property, we are ranked at 154th. Paying taxes, we are at 115th. And as far as enforcing contracts is concerned, we are ranked at a dismal 163rd. It takes 1,445 days in India today for a commercial dispute to get resolved, and we are at 63rd rank. Our competition so far was with the third world, the developing countries of the world, and as we want to inch forward, some of the bolder reforms need to happen. It still takes months to register a new business, get a factory with its 60 to 100 licenses, registrations, permissions, and consent orders off the ground. It still requires about 600 to 1,000 compliances a year for a MSME to work with one single manufacturing plant. They can still be inspected by anywhere between 20 to 40 different inspectors. The inspection process, the inspector Raj is still very much rampant. They still spend a lakh rupees a month dealing with 5 different consultants to complete their compliances. And this is the reality in the 21st century, the 21st year of the 21st century. In spite of the fact that we have moved from 4th quartile in rankings to 2nd quartile. So yes, absolute terms, things have changed. In relative terms, a lot more needs to be done to change the life of an entrepreneur on the ground.
Right, Gayathri, what are your views on this?
Again, thanks, Pran, for inviting me onto the show. I'm going to sort of give you a personal example of what Rishi said. We were trying to open a garment factory, a small one, with 50 to 100 workers off Karnal. And the beauty of it was the place was not available because there are no industrial sheds there. And if you have to get some approval for an industrial shed, it took us a painstaking 8 months, in spite of having the support of the local administration, the central administration, the state administration, and the local MLA. Everybody was encouraging, everybody was really, really supportive. But the reason for it was very, very simple issues. Do you have 3-phase power connection? One would just think, how long can that take? The building is available, how long can that take? Is your road, is it at a cross section? Is a checkpoint which somebody has to come and actually do it? So if we are thinking of taking jobs to semi-urban, I'm not talking rural, I'm talking, small tehsil headquarters, very difficult. Now, let me give you another example. Suppose now you decide to do distribution. The reason I'm picking up these is if we have to work with women's groups, if we have to work with informal sector and we try to formalize it, we try to look at just distribution. If each state you have to have different licenses which you have to get to function. So you have to have a shops and establishment license that you have to get. So can you just imagine if one has to facilitate a small mason or a contractor and you're trying to aggregate it for a informal sector workers, it is very, very difficult. So it looks like people want to support it. I think the government's intent is there, but I think if one is looking at micro to small, very, very difficult still for you to work on this. But having said that, I think digitization has made things a lot simpler in a sense. At least you have it, right? Compared to the past, I would say GST is a good thing that's happened to several of these elements there. But I think I look at it as the third phase of liberalization, or whatever you want to call ease of doing business. And the third phase is going to be a painful phase. We have to cross a lot of barriers if we have to move forward.
Right. Mr. Mehta, what are your views on this?
I broadly concur with my preceding speakers, except to say that the ease of doing business the way it is what we call is ease of getting permits. It doesn't mean ease of doing business. Now, we are doing a project on ease of running a business, to be, looking at one of the biggest problems that we've seen in ease of running a business is the nuisance value of the bureaucracy. It's terrible. Everybody is out there as a rent seeker. It doesn't matter that you got all your permissions in place, etc., etc. Rishi spoke about 40 inspectors. About 30 years ago, I myself ran a small-scale unit, and I and my partner sat down and counted the number of inspectors that we have to, in theory, face. It was 58. 58, Rishi, not even 40. Not that every inspector really mattered, but on Holi Diwali, they used to come for bakshish. And we had to ask them, I said, why should I give you a bakshish? I've got nothing to do with you. But anyway, that is besides the point. It's just in humor that I was mentioning that. The fact is that we have a mindset, a huge mindset problem in our bureaucracy in India, that, look, you're a crook. You have to prove yourself that you are not a crook. It's not the other way around, that you are honest and I have to prove that you're a crook. And I mean, you look at the last Companies Act amendments which took place. Even for intercorporate borrowing, a friend of mine was sent to jail on a weekend. Now, that is what they do very cleverly. They choose a weekend, and so you can be very... Now, intercorporate borrowing from one company of his own to another company, he transferred, and that crossed the ceiling somehow or the other. I will just give you some of these examples which are absolutely exasperating in terms of ease of running a business. Pran, that is what I would like us to focus upon, is not ease of getting permits, whether or not you've got the registration in time or what have you. Even a patwari now, who used to charge 5,000 rupees as a bribe to do the land conversion, now charges 50,000 rupees. You say, you're going to make money, so you better give me more money, and so on. It goes on and on. Now, another very big problem, Pran, is in this whole system of governance with which EODB or EORB or whatever we are talking about is affected, is the lack of accountability. We all know very well that you have provided too much discretionary powers in any way whatsoever. Ajay Shah and Vijay Kelkar wrote an excellent book, if you might have heard about that. It said many of the legal provisions are so badly drafted that they continue to generate negative outcomes. Let me conclude here, Pran, to say that the focus has to be on ease of running business, particularly to handle nuisance values, particularly to create an accountability system through a third-party verification. You can't trust the whole system because each of them scratch the other's back, as you know. And postings are often auctioned also. Critical postings, the Thana posting, for example, is auctioned and so on. So we do require an accountability system which will at least cast some fear. Now, fact is what Rishi said, that undoubtedly the government of India, Niti Aayog, has made a huge effort in trying to resolve the problems that we have in our system of permits, as we call the ease of getting permits. But it is not enough. We still have to travel miles before we can, achieve an easy way of doing business, doing as in running a business. Thank you.
Right. Ashwin, your take? You've been waiting patiently, but your take on this?
No, I think all of the speakers covered most of the ground, and I'll try to add some different points from our experiences working with a few state governments on ease of doing business. So I think one is that, and Rishi's illuminating in this, right, that the amount of uncertainty that entrepreneurs have to go through with the number of laws, notifications, guidelines that come out every day, every month, it is very hard to think about risk planning, investment planning, so on and so forth, when that is the regulatory environment that you're surrounded by. So I think that's a very important piece that when you think about regulatory or policymaker mindset, I think just the impact of just that kind of behavior is very important to think about. That's one. I think two is around these laws have been kind of built on top of each other. So someone, I think in 1950s passed a law, in the 1970s, they realized there was some mistake and a law was passed on top of it. And so I think a lot of research shows that you've got, very different definitions across the same set of laws that applies to one enterprise. And again, I think that creates a lot of confusion, the nuisance value that Mr. Pradeep talked about as well. So I think there is a lot of this unpacking that we have to do, really sit down and say, what are the different overlapping laws? What is the legacy of this ease of doing business work? And a lot of this nuance is not captured in the World Bank reports. And so I think that's the really, I think getting our hands dirty, working over the next 5-7 years work that we have to do that a lot of these reports don't capture. And I think we certainly realizing it's very hard to do. And I think finally, everyone's talking about the entrenched interest, right? So I think we've, in the last couple of months, working with different state governments to remove this license called the trade license, which is really a redundant license if you think about it. The number of the amount of money municipal corporations make from this is a pittance. Similar information is captured in shops and establishments, for example. But just going through this journey of trying to abolish it, you see there were several ULBs and mayors say that, hey, this is, our resources are scarce. You're taking away important financial resources from us. So there's a lot of these entrenched interests that we may say that, governments have intent on ease of doing business, but you have to really go down to the district level sometimes and say, really unpack some of these incentives that exist to really make a useful, meaningful change. At the highest level, at the state government level, you may announce a law. You may announce changes, but if you don't solve for some of these incentive structures, you will see implementation and regulatory reality being exactly the same. And this has been our experience with entrepreneurs, just listening to them as the state governments try new things during COVID and so on, that the experience really hasn't changed.
So Rishi, let me come to you with this question that, the pandemic was new for everyone, but, the set of laws and regulations that we currently have, did it help businesses? Many were looking to even shut down because of financial constraints during this time. How did our laws and regulations function when it comes to easing some of the pain points for businesses?
So, Pran, a great question. Let me give you some numbers here. The law of the land in India is highly fluid, right? It changes many thousand times a year. In a normal year, there are about 3,000 to 3,500 changes. During COVID, the regulatory environment was hyperactive, and we saw an additional 1,100 changes to regulations that affected entrepreneurs. So in the COVID period, if you were to go and look at the numbers, and we have all the numbers published on the website, anybody can look at them. 4,600 odd changes happened in this hyperactive year that affected entrepreneur. Where are these published? On 2,233 different websites across centers, states, and local bodies. How do we find them? Go to the website, browse through it, trying to find the relevant section, go through a miasma of pages, some of them may not even work, and you'll be lucky if you find it. What happened during COVID? There were laws which were getting changed overnight, notifications were coming out, changes to dates, changes to how much you can occupy in the building, who can work, who couldn't work. Many of these changes affected entrepreneurs, but the way information dissemination works in the country is dismal. We don't have a central repository of all of this that affects entrepreneurs. Each local body has their own website, each has its own design and its own navigation structure. Some of this gets reflected on the website days after it actually becomes active. Understanding exactly what happened can be a problem because some of these can be in local languages only. So while things have changed over the last 10 years, but still a lot of these get written in local language. Now, if there's a company headquartered out of, say, a Delhi or a Bangalore, and there is a notification that got issued in another state in the local language, you don't expect an entrepreneur to be having people who can actually translate all of these local languages in India into an understandable way and then make sense out of it. A shall versus a may versus a should can have different meanings in law. So during COVID, some of these things have been tough. Entrepreneurs have gone through them. Getting access to information has been a problem. Second, vast majority of Indian compliances are still ad hoc, manual, paper-based and people-dependent. There is very little digitization on the government side and even lower amount of digitization as far as compliance space is concerned, even on the entrepreneurial side. So you are dealing with a situation where a company has to deal with about 600 to 1,000 compliances, give or take. And I'm talking about a company with a single state, single business, single entity presence in the country. You're dealing with a couple of hundred filings a year, and you're dealing in an ad hoc, manual, paper-based and people-dependent program where proximity to the department, physical filing is important. Now, imagine overlay COVID on top of it. Physical proximity, access, interpersonal meetings, traveling, all of these things became heavily compromised. Now, if an entrepreneur still has to meet with all his compliances, he or she cannot meet with their advisors, consultants, because a typical entrepreneur in a MSME space deals with 5 consultants: a labor consultant, a direct tax consultant, an indirect tax consultant, which is GST, then an EHS consultant, and then a company secretary. All of these intermediaries, if you see the level of digitization, that is best level of digitization would be emails. They are all on emails. They are all available on phone calls. But when it comes to managing compliance in a serious way to avoid penalties, fines, poor compliance, non-compliance, you need much more digitization than just emails and phone calls. Those are the rudimentary tools. So did COVID expose vulnerabilities of our regulatory environment and the assurance that we can give to our board members on whether we are compliant or not? Absolutely. I think we need to learn some lessons, just like the healthcare system is starting to learn some lessons and observe its fallibility and vulnerabilities. I think corporate compliance needs a reboot. It needs a rethink, both on the government side and the private entrepreneurs as well.
Very interesting. Gayathri, what is it that you noticed on ground?
I'm again going to go with examples of how we faced it, and I'm going to take 2 examples. One is in the telemedicine space. One would assume healthcare, Rishi alluded to it, that healthcare we learned. I would really beg to differ. If you have to have a telemedicine, we had an example I'm going to pick the state also, in Himachal, where they said, please bring the doctor to the center, only then telemedicine can be given, because we don't know what law that Niti Aayog has really passed. We're not aware of it. Otherwise, please get it from the state headquarters, from the CM's portal. That's the only way a CMO is able to really take that forward. So anything that you do is very localized, and the intersection between local and state and central makes it very difficult for any operation if you're looking at livelihoods. If you're looking at manufacturing, I mean, we can take sectors, right? If you take leather, rubber, textiles, I think one of the reasons companies want to be small is if you operate multi-state, it's just a nightmare. So if you have smaller, your compliance levels are less, and the cost is still very high, but it's still less than what it is if you try to aggregate and move forward. So the same company may be operating, but it may have 20 different units. So large companies will have 20 units all separately mapped, and then because we were looking at housing, we were looking at social security. The moment we're trying to address these issues, you find so many of these issues need to be addressed individually, which means that they are never going to, I don't know the correct word, but never going to aggregate into one, which is what they are. They are on reality. They should be that, but in all operations, they're separate companies, small companies, some between 50 to 200 workers. So in that case, if we're saying that the new law, the 4 courts which are going to come, I don't know how it will help. Unless we are really going to focus on, what we said is ease of running the business, and we should want people to run the business. Do we want is the big question, or are we, it's almost like you're fighting a ghost half the time. You don't know who you're fighting. You have a sword in the hand and you're off, and at some point you're going to hit somebody. So you don't know who that is, and that's the way it is to run anything. And I'm coming from the fact that if we want wages, if we want social security for workers, then we cannot ignore it. It is, to me, almost impossible. Somebody will find loopholes and say, I am not part of the system and I will be informal, because formality causes tremendous confusion.
Right. Mr. Mehta, what are your thoughts on this?
One is we are advocating very strongly with Niti Aayog, etc. And I was a convener of a planning commission group which designed a regulatory impact assessment sort of institution. Unfortunately, neither the UPA nor the NDA has implemented it, and we hope that it will get some steam now. What we are also doing is in the state of Rajasthan particularly, we are also working on regulatory guillotine. It is based upon a 3-way test. First is the necessity. Second is the legality. And the third is proportionality. How proportionate it is. I will give you an example of many of these issues, and use that regulatory guillotine as a way as to how to clean up the stables of your laws. And fortunately, we are now working with Government of Rajasthan to address this particular issue. By the way, I mean, this is a little different than what I'm saying, but what the Government of Rajasthan did some time ago is to declare that for first 3 years, no unit will require any registration. You start your production and come back for registration after 3 years. I mean, so they avoided all kinds of inspection, all kinds of registration, all kinds of nonsense which goes along with all this. So there are these examples. Now, one of the biggest problems which Rishi spoke about is something which is outside the realm of government. Enforcing contracts. Now, enforcing contracts / dispute settlement, I would say. This is part of the judiciary. Judiciary has to do that. What the Government of India did was, in order to speed up these processes, to pass the Commercial Courts Act, asking special courts to be established for commercial courts as well as in the benches in the High Court, which could speedily resolve disputes of commercial nature instead of getting clogged into the existing system of civil courts where there's understanding lit. Unfortunately, that has moved very slowly. One of the other things, Pran, that also happened, I think people would like to know, is that India had signed a lot of bilateral investment treaties with many countries, And we were hammered, including the latest hammering we've got is from Keynes under that treaty, and we lost the arbitration and so on, that now all our new BITs, or what Indian government calls BIPAs, Bilateral Investment Promotion Agreements, do not have any such dispute settlement. We have made it very clear that you have to exhaust the alternative remedy which is available in the Indian courts before you can go to an international tribunal. Now, so therefore, Arun Jaitley at that point of time very wisely thought that, look, let us have specialized courts to deal with commercial disputes so that they can be faster. Unfortunately, that has moved very slow. The civil court system, as it is bogged down with sort of overload of cases, and there is hardly any thinking on the part of judiciary to address the delays, except for some odd lip sympathy statements made now and then. I mean, let me give you an example. And it's probably Manmohan Singh's time when he was addressing a conference of judges where she suggested that, why do you have that holiday system, summer and winter? You can all enjoy your leave, which you still get over and above your holidays. And that was vigorously resisted. Now, this is a system, Pran, doesn't happen in any country in the world, in any sensible country, except former Commonwealth colonies, I would say, not countries. Even some. I don't know whether even in Africa that system still operates. I haven't looked at it that. So with the result that you have very few days of adjudication available to you at all. Now, there are various systemic reforms which have to be done in the legal system in order to address the ease of running business. This is a very rare case. If we end up with a duopoly, my God, you can well imagine what the rates would look like as we go along. So I'm just giving you an example, and these are all issues which will then affect the cost of doing business in India, the ease of running a business in India, and so on and so forth.
Ashwin?
So these are various issues which require more serious attention.
Sure. Right.
Focus.
Yeah, I think from what all of these different speakers have said, I think one of the consequences of and too much nuisance value of the inspectors, or too many compliances, as Rishi said, as Ms. Gayathri said, like some of the incentives to remain small. We've really seen this dichotomy between the informal and formal, right? In the pandemic in particular, that this EODB system often encourages or discourages formalization, rather, that because the value of formalization is so low, inspectors come, too much compliance, etc., etc. What that has resulted in the pandemic is that when you have government schemes, when you have, say, the ECGLS scheme, 5-7% of MSMEs are able to access it, as opposed to kind of the remaining 95-93% of MSMEs, right? So I think that's big. That's a very important consequence of this ease of doing business that we have to really understand and unpack. And it's really, I think, come to the fore during the pandemic. And I think, like Mr. Pradeep mentioned, there have been attempts to make this easier. Rajasthan has certainly done it. Punjab has done it, trying to just simplify starting a business. So many more are encouraged to formalize today. You can start out without the delays that existed in the past. But we've studied some of these things with other states, and again, that the mire of laws makes it very hard for you to come up with something transformational like this, right? You say that 7 licenses are given, you can get approval in 10 days. But when entrepreneurs start actually applying for these things, they constantly hit the law which says, no, you can't. I mean, there's always some other conflict. There is always some implementation organization that wants to do another check. So governments might think about, state governments in particular might think about these things in the pandemic period, but it hits a stone wall very quickly. And we've seen in some states when they've announced these kind of 10 licenses, you get it in 15 days, you can start a business very quickly. In 6 months, you've got 50 registrations of entrepreneurs. It tells you the response, right? And you talk to those 50 entrepreneurs, they'll tell you the nightmare they went through, even with that journey. So I think there are some of these things that some of this is systemic. State governments can try their best and they can try new things, but on the ground, again, you hit this roadblock very quickly.
Right. Rishi, when it comes to regulatory cholesterol, you did, give out certain numbers. But are things improving? Have they become any better? How bad is it when it comes to stifling businesses?
So I'll let data do the talking here, Pran. Let's take a look at some quick numbers. So on last count, India had about 63 million enterprises, out of which only 1 million were formal enterprises registered for ESI and PF. So 62 million were informal. Out of a million, you examine that data further, only 500,000 are actively contributing to ESI and PF. You further examine this, 70,000 have a revenue of greater than 5 crores. You further take it down, 22,500 have a paid up share capital of 10 crores and more. Now take a macro look at them. 63 million enterprises translate into 22,500, which have a paid up share capital of 10 crores and more, tells you the story of India's regulatory cholesterol. Right? There is a miasma of 1,536 acts in India today that affect entrepreneurs. These translate into about 69,233 compliances across central, state, and local laws, across 7 broad categories, including labor, environment, health and safety, finance and taxation, commercial, industry specific, and secretarial. These are the 7 broad categories. There is another one called general, which is the 7th. So I mentioned 6 here. Those are affecting an entrepreneur. You want to start a small pharma company today with a manufacturing base, you'd be dealing with anywhere between 600 to 1,000 compliances across anywhere between 60 to 100 acts, depending on exactly what you're going to do, because a lot of regulated, pharma is a regulated industry, a lot of industry specific acts become applicable. Automobile, which does not have a regulator in general, also deals with about 600 odd compliances. So when you look at this, and Mr. Mehta spoke about ease of, managing the business rather than ease of starting a business or ease of getting licenses and registrations, you're actually dealing with 30 to 40% of an entrepreneur's time being spent in managing compliance. The 7 broad categories that I spoke to you about, each one of them is highly nuanced. You have more than a single state operation, this burden increases dramatically. An entrepreneur is supposed to be an expert on their core business. So like Gayathri spoke about setting up a small textile unit, the entrepreneur is supposed to be knowing textiles and how they can compete in domestic and international markets. That's what I expect an entrepreneur to focus on. That's what will make them internationally competitive. Today, an entrepreneur does not have time for it because 40 to 50% of their time is managing the day-to-day compliance. Now, one could argue, why don't they employ more consultants? Try, getting consultants on board. You're dealing with thousands of rupees per month in retention costs in having consultants. So there is a cost of managing compliance. Now, story has changed in the last 10 years. 10 years ago, cost of poor compliance was a lot lower than cost of compliance. So most entrepreneurs decided to fly under the radar, stay informal. If they wanted to expand, why expand in the same entity? Create another dwarf out there. Today, unfortunately, for an entrepreneur, the cost of poor compliance has shot up quite dramatically. To end my argument, I'll just throw you one number here. Out of 69,233 compliances that we have in the country, 26,134 have jail term associated with it. So 37% of our compliances can send an entrepreneur to jail. That's the kind of hostile ecosystem that our entrepreneurs operate in. If you look at 21st year of 21st century, it still feels like an Amitabh Bachchan movie of 1970s and 80s, where industrialist per se was a chore. By default, that person was supposed to be exploitative, opportunistic, and robbing an employee of all their benefits. Look at the past 50 years, the world has changed. Entrepreneurs are willing to share equity via ESOPs today. That mindset is shifting. And our laws have to keep pace with the shift in the mindset. Gone are the days where only 2 public sector units were available for a mechanical engineer to go after. Today, there is a fight for talent in the marketplace. Every company is trying to attract talent, creating a best-in-class working environment with great emoluments. Forget basic ESI and PF. The world is changing now. And I think our regulations have to start moving in that direction.
Fascinating, Rishi. Gayatri, I think one of the hallmarks of what we have seen around manufacturing units, from the Amitabh Bachchan days, if I can, take that sentence from Rishi, has been the labor issues where the labor needs to be protected, and you need strong labor laws. But when it comes to ease of doing business, labor laws are often cited as one of the main issues here. uh, how are things on the ground now? Have the new labor codes? Will they change anything?
See, I think first and foremost, they are not yet operational. I think that's the first. It's taking a long time for it to even get operational. The second thing is, if most of them are not in the formal sector and they don't plan to be in the formal sector, coaxing them to be in the formal sector after listening to Rishi, I'm wondering whether we're doing the right thing. So first and foremost, even people like us who possibly engage these consultants to help entrepreneurs who are very small formalize, maybe doing the wrong thing. So I really want to ask if our intent is to actually ensure better wages and social security. I think these are the two things which are important for an employee, and these are the two things which any company today, I would say at least 30% of them are really want to do it. I mean, there is another set which takes time for you to move, but those 30 will not be allowed to do it, and that is the worry. For example, PF itself, suddenly one day, because you had to have UAN, there was a blanket change made. Then can you take out your PF money easily? The employee does not know, the company does not know. Not all of them are that aware for it to make. And I've got like every day, saying ये number change कराना है, ये number change कराना है. Number change कराना इतना आसान नहीं है. How do you file a PF and ESI, right? Everybody doesn't get employed on the first day of the month, and then you upload everything. Every other thing is an individual upload. So the cost of running a compliance-driven business is very high. So I think one has to look at labor as a cherished entity, not as a beneficiary. If you start looking at them as a beneficiary, you can always do DBT, right? And the complexity of DBT, I don't want to discuss. I have a lot of reservations in having a lot of selection criteria there, but I do definitely feel that if we don't treat them as workers, if we don't treat them as employees, we will make the mistake while we are trying to do good. So we may think that we are actually bringing labor wages, social security up, but in my opinion, frankly, it doesn't even affect them. The second is, the states which made changes, UP, Madhya Pradesh, Maharashtra, all did 8 hours to 12 hours. I mean, they were all having OT. They were anyway working there as migrant workers with overtime. How they calculated overtime, there have been lots of debates, right? Karnataka, the state I stay in, had the whole flare-up in Kolar, where workers went berserk and broke everything. But the point is, this is all because of the manual nature of this entire business. That's why all this is possible. Unless we are really interested in changing it, we'll just make cosmetic changes. And cosmetic changes are dangerous because they seem to make the impact, but don't actually have the impact on the ground. So, and as I said, when you're trying to look at informal to formal, in my opinion, there are just two things I take as criteria. And I'm not going by the legality of this. I'm just looking at it from a very simple thing, right? Wage, social security. Do I get monthly wage? Do I get social security? It's not like every worker is a daily wage worker in India. There is a significant who are a monthly wage worker, but they don't get to be monthly wage. We want them to be daily wage. I mean, that's the tragedy of it all. And therefore, sometimes I look at gig and say, okay, maybe, if so much investment is coming into e-com, probably that's going to result in a change for the workers because outsourcing did not help. Our informality did not help them. And that's the issue. And PF and ESI, I think, are just so complex. The ESI system is not good. And on top of it, the complexity of paying for it sometimes beats me.
Rishi talked about, the kind of compliances that we need.
Yeah, no, I know it's. I ran a small-scale unit in Faridabad from 1970 to 75 during the Amitabh Bachchan days, and then 75 to 85 in Jaipur. So I have first-hand experience, and I should say that, but it probably sounds vain, but I was a Superman. I was the labor welfare officer, I was the chairman, I was the marketing manager, I was everything possible. I had a partner, but the partner was an engineer and could only look after the production, which itself was a major job. We had two strikes, two long strikes in our small unit, because at one point of time our labor had gone up to 100. And we had a very, that is one thing which nobody talks about in EODB or EORB, is the trade union militancy, which often then acts as a very big drawback. Now, Pran, I'm going to be disjointed now, because of the various points which have been made, and remark and comment on each of them separately. So it is not in sequence. Now, one of the problems that we face, and we do a lot of work on trade policy, in fact, we are globally well known for our work on trade policy. We are not competitive because we cannot grow. Our units cannot grow. We cannot achieve scale. That is a very poor outcome of what our whole system is about. Garments, for example, show me one factory which there's probably one or two factories which engages more than 10,000 labor. Otherwise, generally, they're all very, very small. And therefore, they cannot achieve economies of scale. And therefore, we are not competitive. Today, Bangladesh has beaten us in textile export when they were behind us. And those who may not know, but there was an agreement on textiles and clothing which provided protection to LDCs like Bangladesh, as compared to developed countries. When that agreement was expiring, Bangladesh raised a big noise that, look, if it goes away, then we lose the market, the reserve market. And on the contrary, what happened was what we saw. And if you go to Dhaka, if you go to Bangladesh, you'll find factories employing thousands. Of course, there have been accidents, but that is not the point that I'm going to look at. But if you compare India with Bangladesh alone, you'll see that scale matters. And that scale is a consequence of the kind of business regulation that we allow, including not allowing small to become big or big to become bigger. A third point that I'd like to make in terms of ESI and PF. All very good, well thought about welfare legislation, as most of our welfare legislations are. But do they give the worker the status of being a partner in your production? They don't. Gayathri was speaking about a bit. It's only the other day I heard R.C. Bhargava speak at another webinar like this, that the worker is a partner in our business, and without the worker, we'll not be able to do what we're doing. Have our factories been able to treat the workers as a human capital rather than to treat them as cost centers? That is the other problem. As I said, this is a little off track, but since the issues were raised, I thought it is important to understand that in one way or the other, they relate to the scale issue that we are looking at, turning from informal to formal. For example, when I was running a small-scale factory in Jaipur in 1970 during Amitabh Bachchan's Janji days. And, there is a section 7 under the PF Act, which is, again, obnoxious. You cannot file an appeal against the PF Commissioner's order. Can you imagine? You have these kind of obnoxious. I'm giving you an example again, which, again, impacts business. And how can you have a section that does not allow you appeal? And that has happened that became then a kind of a beacon for many such laws where appeals were not, So, I mean, these are various issues which I think that, Pran and ET should take up more seriously and, do a little 800-word story every day on it.
So yeah, we do our part, but if I can come to you, Ashwin.
Case studies.
Yes. I think that's something that we should definitely take up. But Ashwin, if I can come to we hear a lot of these problems. One of the main ones again is enforcing a contract. How do we ensure that things get better from here onward?
Sure. So I think one example that we're working with quite closely is this whole delayed receivables between large buyers and MSMEs. And government has a specific portal for this called the Samadhan portal. So I think if you just look at the numbers there are about 80,000 applications that were filed around delayed payments, and about 60% of them remain pending in some way or the other. So I mean, I think this is kind of a big clog for MSMEs, and one of the solutions that seems very promising and a few different folks are investing in it is online dispute resolution, and building a set of norms around what is the standard at which you need to go to court, right? Can we solve something through mediation? Can it be done at a much more lower cost and more effectively than direct? Of course, we have to build court system capacity. I mean, that is a state capacity, something that India has to invest in heavily. But I think as something that we should innovate around and try, I think the ODR ecosystem that's building, the World Bank is pushing it. There are some impact investors that are pushing it. It seems quite promising, and there are 10 to 15 startups that have come into this system that are trying to resolve some of these disputes very quickly through more effective means. So I think that's one direction, certainly, that we should head in or enable as government, as investors, and so on.
So, Rishi, when it comes to paying taxes, that's also one issue where it is a problem. What is the impact of GST? I mean, I have covered GST since 2017, and it was launched, and right up till now, it hasn't been friendly. I mean, we all know it. What has been the impact of GST? And then we have an entire bit for our corporate taxes.
So, Pran, I would characterize GST as a short-term pain for the long-term gain, right? Let me elaborate. Pre-GST, if anyone has run a company in India, there were about 17 odd indirect tax regimes, right? Sales tax, service. I think Mr. Mehta wants to say something.
No. I'm agreeing with you.
Okay. So there were about 17.
I'm speaking from experience.
Different indirect tax regimes. So sales tax, service tax, excise, central excise, LBT, luxury tax, entry taxes on octroi, you name it, right? And 1991, which was the start of our reform journey, incidentally on Saturday this month, we celebrated the 30th year or 30th anniversary of that reform. That reform killed license Raj practically. But what it left is the Inspector Raj.
Yeah.
Right? Imagine
Well said.
we are cribbing and complaining about GST, but before GST, there were 17 different indirect tax regimes that an entrepreneur dealt with, and there were so many of them local to every city. So if you had a multi-city operation or a multi-state operation, imagine the number of inspectors that you were dealing with. Different registration numbers, different authorities, different ways of calculations, different dates for filing returns, different record keeping requirements, different frequencies of inspections. All of these things were really complex. What happened on GST day, 1st July, I think, 2017 or whatever it was, we subsumed all these tax regimes into a single tax regime. Largest ever indirect tax reform undertaken on the face of the planet. Have we gone through pain? Yes. Will it settle down anytime soon? No. I think another 3-4 years will be required for this mega reform to become stable, to settle, and all of the nuances to be ironed out. It will take some time. But trust me, when it does settle down and all the wrinkles are ironed, India will have put behind a very large beast that was a big hurdle in its progress towards the $10 trillion economy. So it has helped, but it's a short-term pain, but it will overhaul this whole thing. We are over 100 in rank on paying taxes. Hopefully, when all of this settles down, the the gain will be a lot better, will be really great, and entrepreneurs can breathe relatively much easier.
Gayathri, on one hand, businesses want flexible labor policies. At the same time, we do realize the need to protect workers' interests. Have we found a middle ground? And if not, what can that be?
So you'll be surprised. Oh, sorry. Go ahead,
Oh,
Gayatri.
go ahead, Rishi. Go ahead, Rishi.
I just wanted to add one point there, Pran. 91% of our labor is outside the ambit of labor laws today. So what you
Yeah.
are talking about in terms of protection is only for the 9% labor in the organized sector, and the rest 91% still do not benefit from our labor laws. So I think the first problem that we have to deal with is try and expand the scope of these applicability of labor
True.
laws so that a larger chunk of our labor which is currently outside can start benefiting. Go ahead, Gayatri.
I think I completely echo that. That's why I said it's an irrelevant issue as far as I'm concerned. Doesn't even affect most of the labor. Unless we really want to formalize them, right? I don't think this is going to happen. Labor laws are not for the informal sector. The informal sector is better left off if we are not able to make other changes. That's the dichotomy that we are facing. So unless that is going to change, and if it is women, I think it is even worse. You have all the check boxes which are there, but in reality, there's really no protection whatsoever. And I think a lot of this is to do with the idea that they're not labor, they're beneficiaries. So if they have a trouble, I will, give them a little bit of money. Unless we treat them as partners in progress, unless we're going to say that, they are productive human beings who are contributing to the economy, I think that mindset change is required. Then we'll see them as assets. You see, and I often think I have sour grapes. Whenever you read this whole e-com and the entire buzz around it, I think to myself, what is the difference? And maybe I'm ancient, maybe I deal with only the manufacturing and services of the poor, but I think to myself, is there a difference? How does that worker really benefit, right? And I'm not saying that there should not be e-com. Please don't get me wrong. I genuinely believe that has democratized a lot of things. I do believe in it. But having said that, I do believe that as a country, we refuse to look at our workers as equals. We would be happy to have them in a subservient position, and that's why SOPs are better for us than labor laws. How do we want to make PF and ESI? I keep coming back to that because a lot of our work is to ensure that many people come under the PF and ESI ambit. But honestly, it is backbreaking work and it is quite thankless. You sometimes think to yourself, are you doing the right thing? And then you tell yourself, it's between the devil and the deep sea. You want to formalize because that's a good thing to do. At least that's what we've been told. But when you do it, the pain of doing it for both the worker as well as the companies is just too enormous.
Ashwin, if I can come to you, we hear a lot about startups in the country now. Creating that ecosystem for startups. So I would presume that starting up has become easier now. Is that so?
Well, I mean, depends on what kind of business you are. So yeah, so I think if you're a restaurant, if you're a manufacturing unit, if you're not a software or an app, starting a business is still hard. I think the last number that we counted for a few states, thanks mostly to Rishi's data, that you need about 70 odd licenses to set up your business. And that, I mean, this is the quantity, right? Individually, if you try to go department by department, go to different government bureaucracies, try to get these, it's a lot of time taken. I think there's this nice story or blog by the Maharashtra entrepreneur who went to 16 different departments trying to get 12 different NOCs It took him 9 months, and after 9 months, we didn't get an update of whether the unit started or not. So that's still the case. I mean, yeah, I think the startup story in India really distracts from the semi-skilled job creation story that we really need to build. Startups or the IT sector is 8% of GDP, but 1% of employment. It is not going to create the jobs that India sorely needs, and we need labor-intensive jobs. We need those kind of enterprises coming up, and those kind of enterprises both hard to start but much harder to run, as everyone has pointed out on this panel.
Rishi, I just wanted to add one thing.
Yes.
To what Ashwin said. It is actually the labor-intensive ones which are very difficult to start and difficult to run. Banks don't understand them. You're not going to get any other form of capital, sorry. So your only source of capital is the bank. So at one level, you have a startup problem. And I think in this period of time, the question you had asked earlier, how did it treat enterprises and workers? Several of them just couldn't run and they cannot access anything. They're saying, please give us your P&L for last year. I mean, seriously, didn't we know that there is a problem here? We have serious problem of understanding these smaller entities. And smaller entities are what will create jobs. Jobs are not going to come from only the large entities. So smaller and medium entities, we have to nurture them. We want them to grow for jobs, I think, has to be the, the mantra. We need to like them.
Right. I think
as a country, we treat them as groups.
Yes. I think one of these sessions that we have done already, we talked about why we do not, why India does not have globally competitive companies. And one of the key things that came out from that session was that we lack the medium industry. That is where the job gets created, and we hardly have any medium companies, maybe 1,000 of them at the most. So that is an issue. And I think the economic survey 2 years ago put it very nicely when they devoted an entire chapter. They said that buying a gun in Delhi is easier than setting up a restaurant. So that is where we stand. So we're running out of time. So last question to each of you would be the same. If there is one reform that you would want to make life easier for businesses, what would that be? Starting with Ashwin.
So I think need of the hour for many businesses, at least, is liquidity and cash. So I think two ways in which we can do this. One is around how can we make sure that their buyers pay them on time, which brings essential liquidity. And the other point that Gayathri mentioned, how can we make it much easier for them to access capital? And that has to do with KYC, that has to do with registration, just making that process a lot better, reducing the requirements and norms around that. And I think those two things at this stage seem incredibly important. So the more we can do to pass down liquidity to MSMEs, the better we will be.
Mehta, one reform.
Yeah, one point that we should institutionalize regulatory impact assessment, including bring in tools like regulatory guillotine and 1 in, 2 out kind of measures, which would enable for us to get rid of a lot of useless and redundant legislative provisions, I would say, rather than laws.
Right.
Thank you.
Gayathri?
I would say compliance. I mean, just reduce the compliance for small businesses and medium businesses to grow. So 3 ones I'll pick on is PF, ESI, and professional. All 3 are hugely problematic if we don't address it. And would second Ashwin is liquidity. And liquidity needs a complete overhaul. Companies which are not even functioning, especially in a COVID situation, if you give debt, I'm not sure I don't even know what we're trying to do. So we need to think of capital structures very differently. Financial re-engineering is required considering the problem that is there.
Right. And Rishi, since you're smiling the most, we'll let you have the last laugh.
So I have a very simple suggestion, Pran. Set up a compliance commission immediately with a 6-month timeline given to them and slash the compliance burden in India by half. It can easily be done. We've been very closely working on this subject. There's so much duplication, so much redundancy, so much overlap that this can go down to half and nobody will feel a pinch. Bottom line, a country which is going for $10 trillion as an ambition to get at the end of this decade does not need to overburden its entrepreneurs with 70,000 unique compliances.
True. Mr. Mehta, I think you have something.
Yeah, just 30 seconds. Rishi, it's a very ideal thinking that you have. But don't forget that most of the compliances are at the level of states and local bodies. How are you going to, go around this whole maze with any command from Delhi? Is impossible.
Right? I think
Totally agree with you, Mr. Mehta. The only counter to that is, just like Swachh Bharat Abhiyan created a lot of sensitivity and awareness at city levels, municipal corporations started competing with each other in order to get to that level. And we have seen some very positive results in changing of culture. I think investment attraction and job creation need to be the next Swachh Bharat equivalent, where municipal corporations and states start competing in a healthy environment for attracting investments and creating jobs. And once you get to that, I think each one of them will be happy to set up a local compliance commission and start reviewing this burden and start slashing it down. We recently finished an assignment with Punjab. 490 odd compliances were eliminated or are being eliminated as we speak. So that's doable. All we need is intention followed by execution.
so. I think fascinating discussion. What we can do is, probably 1 year down the line, let's have, the same set of panelists and figure out, if things have improved, have they remained the same, and see if we as a nation has moved forward in ease of doing business. Before I end, a quick thank you.
Ease of running a business.
Yes, ease of running.
Change your vocabulary.
Yes, ease of running a business. That's what I'm going to stick to now. Quick thank to all our sponsors: Cell Globally partner eBay, banking partner Deutsche Bank, state partner MIDC, and assessment partner Care Advisory. Thank you so much, Gayathri, Rishi, Ashwin, and Mr. Mehta. Thank you so much.